Sex in the City, Chapter 1. A new neighborhood. Alice looked up at the apartment block and smiled before turning back to Charles. Well, we had better get started. It is going to be a long day moving everything in. I still think we should have paid to have a removal company shift our stuff rather than doing it ourselves. Charles scowled. I know, but we have saved ourselves a fortune, which is a good thing considering the mortgage cost on this place. Even with my pay raise for accepting the promotion, we are still only just within our comfort zone money-wise. Alice really didn't care. She knew it made sense and was excited about moving into the top-floor 3-bedroom apartment with all the latest technology and views out over the city. But she also knew that the need to move themselves was a sensitive point with Charles, and she loved winding him up every now and then. Alice turned and walked towards the flat. I will go and open the doors. You had better get the first box. Charles watched as his wife walked towards the front door. He loved her with all his heart and worshipped her body. He particularly loved her arse. He admired it as she walked towards the apartment in the tight figure-hugging jeans and a plain white shirt. The rest of the day was spent carrying their belongings from the van up to their apartment. Thankfully, the apartment block had a couple of lifts, but then for what this place cost, it was expected. Neither of them saw anybody during the day, and they guessed that all the other occupants were at work. By mid-afternoon, all their belongings were in, leaving Alice to start unpacking the boxes. Charles returned the van to the rental company and collected their car. As Charles pulled into the underground car park, he noticed a blonde woman getting out of a sports car. It was the legs that he first noticed as she swung both legs out together in an attempt to keep her modesty. He watched as she turned and bent over to retrieve her bag from the passenger seat, showing off her curvy arse. She straightened up, smoothed down her skirt and walked toward the lifts. Charles shook himself out of his trance and jumped out of the car. He walked towards the lifts and caught up with the woman as she pressed the call button for the lift. She turned and looked at him. Charles smiled. "Hello, do you live here?" he asked by way of a conversation starter. Clearly suspicious, she nodded and said, "Yes. My name's Charles. We have just moved into the apartment on the 3rd floor." The women looked at him carefully. "You said we?" "Oh yes, me and my wife Alice. I have just returned the van and collected our car, leaving Alice to start unpacking. Hopefully, she will have found the essentials. It is going to take us quite a few days to get straight. I never realized how much stuff we had accumulated at the old house." The woman smiled and offered out her hand. "I am Catherine. My husband is called Robert. I am sure you will get organized, but I would suggest tonight you take your wife out for a meal. There are some good restaurants just round the corner." Charles shook Catherine's hand and said, "That is a good idea. Would you recommend any?" "I would recommend the Italian, but then I am not a fan of anything too spicy." The lift arrived and both go into it. Catherine pressed the button for floor 2 and Charles leaned over and pressed the large 3 button. "Thanks for the tip. I think we will go out for a meal tonight. I certainly don't want to start cooking, and I suspect that Alice will feel the same way." Catherine got out at the 2nd floor saying, "Well, I hope you enjoy living here. It is a nice area. If you need anything, just give us a knock, and I look forward to meeting Alice." Charles nodded and replied, "Thank you again for the restaurant tip. Enjoy your evening." Charles watched as Catherine walked out of view. He admired her pert backside in the tight A-line skirt and high heels. The door closed and took him up to the 3rd floor. Alice loved the idea of going out for something to eat, and with the basic stuff put away and the place starting to look like home, she dashed off to get ready. 4 hours later they were leaving the restaurant and walking slowly arm in arm back towards the new apartment. "Won't take long to get the place sorted, will it?" asked Charles. Alice shook her head and Charles smiled. "It is just that we only have the weekend before we both have to get back to work." Alice looked up at Charles. "We will get as much as possible done, and whatever is left we will sort out during the week when we get the time." It was only a short walk back to their apartment, and as they walked slowly along they looked through the windows of those houses which had yet to shut out the world. They made up short and quick stories about the things they saw, from children playing on consoles to the old women eating their microwave meal for one. As they got to the end of the street they saw through the front window a young couple kissing. Charles and Alice stopped and looked in. The couple was in the kitchen. The woman had obviously been busy preparing something at a work surface, and the guy had come up behind her and nuzzled her neck, pushing his body into her. The woman turned her head and the guy wrapped his arms around her and they started to kiss. Without thinking, Charles stepped behind Alice and pushed his body into her back. Alice pushed back, both watching and mirroring the couple in the window. The woman has moved her arms behind her and was rubbing herself up and down the guy, who was now moving his hands up and down her body, caressing her torso. He slipped his hands beneath her top and started to massage her tits. Charles tried to slip his hands underneath Alice's jumper and do the same to her, but at that moment a car came round the corner and Alice grabbed his hands. "Let's get home quickly." She set off at a pace, almost dragging Charles behind her. Charles looked quickly at the window, but the couple had gone almost certainly to shag one another's brains out, and that was what he was going to do to Alice as soon as they got into the flat. They both almost ran back to the apartment block, and having used the passkey to get into the lobby area, called the lift. Charles suddenly grabbed Alice by the hand and swung her round so that their bodies met face to face and started to kiss her. Alice responded with similar passion, and when the lift arrived and the doors opened they inched their way into it without breaking the kiss. As the doors closed, Charles ran his hands down Alice's back and squeezed her arse before slowly pulling her skirt up to expose her knickers. Just then the doors started to open and Alice spun around to face the doors, smoothing down the back of her dress. The doors opened onto an empty first-floor landing. Both of them giggled and Charles reached over and pressed the button to close the doors so that the lift could continue its journey to the third floor. This time as the doors closed, Alice hitched her dress and swiftly pulled down her knickers, stepping out of them and pushing them into Charles' jacket pocket. Charles pulled her into his body again and they started to kiss passionately. The lift doors opened and still wrapped in each other's arms they moved slowly towards the front door. Charles fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the front door keys and handed them to Alice. Alice turned to put the key in the front door lock and Charles used this moment to hitch up Alice's skirt and start to stroke her arse. Alice slapped his hand away. "Stop it. Wait until we get inside, the neighbors," she giggled. "Let the neighbors look," Charles growled. "I am happy to show off such a sexy arse, especially when it is attached to such a sexy wife." He flicked her skirt up again and slapped her arse gently but firmly. Alice wiggled her arse at him and quickly put the key in the door and opened it. Charles pushed her quickly through the door and Alice fell forward, ending up lying over the arm of one of the leather sofas which was just inside the door. Charles walked through the door and closed it with his left foot as he advanced towards Alice's arse, which was wiggling at him as she laughed. He dropped to his knees and parted her arse cheeks so to display her shaven pussy, glistening with moisture which showed how turned on Alice was. Charles leaned forward and breathed in deeply the smell of her pussy before gently licking it. Alice moaned and pushed back as Charles' tongue probed her pussy and licked at the hood to her clit. Charles slipped a finger into her as he licked around her arse. Alice continued to moan and wriggle as Charles's tongue moved up and down her slit. His dick was now straining trapped as it was inside his trousers. With one hand he reached down and undid his belt and trousers and pulled his erect cock out above the waistband of his boxers. Charles continued to lick Alice. "Oh God! Don't stop! Don't stop!" Alice panted as she gripped the side of the sofa tightly. "Oh, that feels so good! I'm going to come! Oh yes! Oh yes!" Alice could feel the waves of an orgasm starting to build inside her cunt, the warmth starting inside and gently spreading outwards to all her limbs and especially her warm and wet cunt. "Oh, oh, oh yes!" Alice moaned into one of the cushions as her pussy contracted and the orgasm washed over her. Alice's legs started to buckle under her as Charles continued to lick and finger her. "Stop! Enough! Enough!" Alice panted as she reached back and pushed his head away from her. Pushing herself up off the sofa, she turned around and as her legs were still shaking dropped to her knees in front of Charles. She reached up and in one swift movement pulled his trousers and boxers to his ankles. Charles kicked off his shoes and stepped out of his clothes. Alice reached up and took his erect cock in her hand and slowly started to move her hand up and down the shaft. She leaned forward and took one his balls in her mouth and gently sucked it, releasing it with a small pop as she started to lick up the shaft. She licked around the head and then opening her mouth slowly took the head into her mouth and started to inch her way down the shaft. Each bob of her head took his cock further into her mouth and soon she was nearly at the base. Charles moved his hands to the side of Alice's head. She knew he was going to push her head further onto his cock and was prepared for it. She moved her hands to either side of his cock and allowed Charles to push his hips further so his cock sunk deeper into her throat. Alice could feel her gag reflex starting to kick in and pushed back with her hands. Charles relented, and free to move again Alice started to bob up and down on Charles' cock. She could hear Charles' breathing become shallower and she looked up into Charles's eyes. She moved her mouth back to the tip of his cock and as she wanked his cock slowly she flicked her tongue out teasing the head. Charles was starting to get near and as much as he would have loved to fill her mouth with his cum he wanted to fuck her. Pushing her away from him he pulled Alice to her feet. "Not yet, young lady, we need to christen this apartment properly." Alice smiled and pulled her little jumper over her head and let her skirt fall to the floor. She turned and reached behind her, unhooked her bra and as she slowly and sassily walked towards the master bedroom stretched out her arm and let the bra fall to the floor. Charles watched the now naked Alice slowly swing her hips seductively as she walked. The only sound was Alice's heels on the hardwood floor. As she reached the doorway she looked back at him. "Are you coming or is it all too much for you?" Charles laughed and started to follow Alice, stopping to remove the last vestiges of his clothing and dropping them on the floor and creating a trail all the way to the bedroom. By the time Charles got to the bedroom door, Alice was already climbing onto the bed on her hands and knees. She turned to face him and with a wicked glint and sly smile beckoned him towards her. Needing no invitation to fuck his wife, Charles moved purposely to the bed and flipped Alice over onto her back. Pulling her legs open he kissed the inside of her left calf before shuffling forward and placing the tip of his cock at the entrance to her pussy. Alice reached down between her legs and stroked her clit as Charles pushed his cock into her tight pussy. Alice moaned and pushed her hips up to meet his thrust and pushed Charles' cock further into her. Charles started to thrust rhythmically. Alice closed her eyes and arched her head back, moaning as Charles' cock went in and out of her pussy. Alice ran her hands down his arms as Charles started to speed up, thrusting in and out. She suddenly pulled herself up. "Oh God! Harder! Fuck me harder!" she moaned and flopped back onto the bed. Charles rammed his cock in harder and Alice squealed. Her moaning got louder and Charles knew she was close to coming, as was he. He grabbed her hips and pulled her onto him as she had her second orgasm of the hour. As the orgasm flooded over her, Alice thrashed her head and arms from side to side. Charles, seeing her in the throes of ecstasy, was enough to push him over the edge. With one final thrust, Charles felt his cock twitch and he filled Alice's pussy with cum. Charles fell forward on his elbows and kissed Alice. "Consider the new home christened." Alice laughed. "Yes, here and here's to many more fuck sessions." Charles rolled over and lay on his back, his cock slowly deflating, the last of his cum dripping from his cock onto his waist. Alice sat up. "Well, I am going to go and get showered. Care to join me?" She looked down at Charles' cock and then lowered her head and licked up the last bit of cum off his cock and body. "Lovely, let's quickly freshen up and then hopefully you will be ready to go again." Alice got off the bed and wandered into the ensuite. Charles heard the shower being turned on and, feeling tired but satisfied, prized himself off the bed and headed off to join Alice in the shower.